Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Dr. Tony Crisp, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Thank you for having me, Paul. Let's get going.
Yeah, right on, Tony. We should mention that you and I connected through Mark Jenkins. How do you and Mark know each other?
Well, it goes all the way back to I was speaking on the national stage at APAC. I had flown back from Israel to speak back during, I think it was 2010, 2011. And they wanted me to speak as an evangelical Christian. And as an evangelical Christian, it was a great honor for me to be able to stand. I think there were 17,000 people there. And I spoke from my heart about everything from anti-Semitism to replacement theology in the Church of Jesus today and so forth. And Mark was in the room. And he asked God, said, if I could work with that man, you want us working together, would you work it out for me to meet him today? Because I was being whisked around everywhere as a guest. And so we had a Christian outreach dinner is what they called it, luncheon. And at the table, I was seated with Joel Rosenberg and Mark Jenkins. And so that began our friendship. And we have been working together very closely ever since. He's my executive producer for all of the TV shows and radio, everything. He oversees all of that. He and another friend, Greg Elgin, who's a media guy and producer. And we brought on 2 or 3 more since then to help. And that's how we've got started. And so we work hand in hand together in almost all things Israel.
Yeah, I had a chance to meet Mark a few months ago, and he is a wonderful person and extremely
knowledgeable. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So you mentioned APAC. Can you describe what APAC is?
Yes, that's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And that's not a PAC as in a political action committee. A public affairs committee educates. It seeks to educate Congress in this case. They don't deal with administration as much as the House and Senate to influence legislation and keep the U.S.-Israel relationship strong. And as an evangelical, most evangelicals are with CUFI, Christians United for Israel, John Hagee's group or so forth. But AIPAC had been a Jewish organization, Paul, from its very beginning, and no non-Jews were in it. In 2007, they made the decision to reach out to evangelicals because they realized we're the greatest friend that Israel has, and we are increasing, they are decreasing as far as the ratio of the population. So they reached out to us. And they reached out to me, took me and 14 others on a major behind-the-scenes trek to Israel. And I'd been going already for 40-some years and knew the land very well. But this was a political trip to educate us on the U.S.-Israel relationship. It was fascinating. And so after a year in 2010, I went on the National Council and was on it until 2020. And that's the decision-making body of AIPAC.
We're going to talk a lot more about Israel in general, America's relationship with Israel. I also want to explore like how you have become who you are today. And so a bit of a, not necessarily chronological, but talk about your life in the form of stories and conversation. But I want to explore, you've spoken in front of 17,000 people. That beats me by about 16,000, and I'm guessing that's not the largest crowd you've spoken in front of.
Well, AIPAC at that time had a national policy forum, and that's what it was, National Policy Conference. And sometime during that, 70% of Congress would be in the audience or would be there somewhere in the Washington, D.C. Convention Center. And it was the premier policy conference in all of the nation. And so I was asked to speak there simply because I had just gotten back from that trip, and they knew that I had spoken on national level before the audiences and wouldn't be petrified by God's grace. And so I remember, I've spoken from the dais several times, and for the decade of 2010 to 2020, I always had led a breakout group or two or a panel discussion about the U.S.-Israel relationship. And it was a very, very blessed experience. I had no qualms with AIPAC. The left thinks they're too right. The right thinks they're too left. But, if you're going to get anything done, whether we like it or not, we have to work with people that don't believe 100% like we do. As a matter of fact, I don't agree with myself with everything. And so it's you just have to learn to work with people as much as you can without compromising who you are.
Yeah, and it seems to be tougher these days than ever, but I don't want to get into the societal stuff that we struggle with today. In a broad way, I definitely want to talk about.
I know.
Yeah. So, all right. So I know where you grew up, but why don't you tell our listening audience where you grew up?
Well, I grew up in the hills of East Tennessee and the valleys. I grew up about halfway between Knoxville and Chattanooga, for those who are not familiar with Tennessee, and even giving those two cities, which are major cities in East Tennessee, still people may not know where that is. And so it is east of Nashville, and it's in the Smoky Mountain region between the Cumberland Mountains and the Smokies is Tennessee Valley. It runs from Bristol all the way to Dalton, Georgia. And so I grew up, Paul, as one born out of due time. In other words, I was born in 1956. I just turned 68 years old. And I was the youngest of three boys. When I was 7, my mother, who had married my dad at age 14 to get out of a horrible home situation with abuse and so forth, married my dad, who was 8 years older. The marriage lasted for 16 years, and she left, abandoned her 3 boys. And my dad, that was the first girl he'd ever kissed, gone to bed with, loved, and he loved her till the day he died. And so it was more than he could take. And so even though he stayed with us the best he couldn't read or write or anything like that, very backwoods and awkward. So we went to live with our grandmother, my mother's mother. And it was a very rural country, just so far out. Our driveway was a half a mile long off the dirt road. And I'm not trying to be poor mouth or anything. I'm just telling you the way it was. And so I was raised in the 60s and 70s the same way that people were in the 30s and 40s. My grandmother raised me the same way she raised my mother. So we got our water from the spring until I was 10 years old. We didn't have a refrigerator, which was 1966. And we kept we milked cows, a couple of cows. My grandmother took the cream, made the butter. I gathered eggs, and we bartered eggs and butter at the grocery store, which was about 3 miles away through the woods and fields. And I would barter eggs and butter for flour, meal, sugar, lard. We raised our own hogs, killed hogs, rendered lard, all that kind of thing. Just like people it was like a Waltons growing up, only the Waltons would have been rich compared to us. And so that's the way we went. I never read a serious book until I was 19 years old, after I came to know Jesus in a personal way. And so we had no supervision growing up. My grandmother was crippled. We didn't even have a toilet, an outside toilet. We had 160 acres of woodland, so we were the early environmentalists. And so we did everything we did outside. The day that I really answered the call of God upon my life to preach the gospel, my grandmother was washing on a rub board. because that's just the way that we grew up, Paul. But my grandmother was a godly woman. She loved Jesus, and she constantly prayed for us, and she didn't know how to pray silently. She always prayed out loud. And so she was always asking God to bring us to himself. And it just, when I was 19, I was at the end of my rope, and I came to know Jesus in a personal way, and he radically changed my life.
Tell me more about that experience, how you went from not being godly to, was it one moment?
Again, we had no supervision. Many times I would leave home as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old boy, because my grandmother never drove a car. She never got out of the county hardly at all. And so we could leave and go to school and not come back home. Some of us would be there, one of the three of us, to do the chores around the place. But I tried to get out where I could go take a shower somewhere, because you see, growing up, Paul, I would hear older people that were my age in the 60s then, in their 60s, say, boy, that's the way I grew up. Everybody was poor. We didn't even know we were poor. Well, I knew we were poor because everybody else had running water and all the conveniences that we have. And so it was very difficult. And I was in a lot of fights, and I became very rebellious because I was resentful that I was growing up like that. I hated my mother. I loved my father, but I hated my mother. And when I was 11 years old, just to give you the sense of bitterness, when I was 11, my oldest brother got his license, 16, and we didn't have a car, but, he got his license, and we had the hope and dream of one. And I said, he said to our other brother, John, it said, when you get 16, where does the first place you want to drive? And John gave some kind of answer, and he said, what about you, Tony? What do you do? And I said, well, I'm going to, as soon as I can drive, I'm going to go find that SOB. I didn't say SOB, but I said, I'm going to find that SOB that took our mother away from us, and I'm going to kill him in front of Mom, and then I'm going to kill her.
Wow.
And that's a deep hatred at 11 years old that was in my heart, because I'd seen that ruin my dad's life, ruin our lives at the time, I thought. And so I grew up very rebellious. Somebody would make fun of my grandmother, and I would just go into them like a buzzsaw. And so I was in the principal's office a lot. As a matter of fact, when I was pastor at First Southern Baptist, San Diego, California, the principal, when he retired, flew me back to speak at his retirement ceremony. It was a big deal. And he introduced me. He said, the reason I had Tony Crisp to come back is because he said his 8th grade year, he spent more time in my office than my secretary. And so I really got to know him. And so that was my life going through school. And so I was just very rebellious. And I had gotten to the point to where I was, I had no ambition, had no desire. And right before my 18th birthday, I had begun to think about taking my own life, just be very honest. So my grandmother had prayed for me, and she had prayed for me and prayed for me. And when about a year before, maybe two, my grandmother, we had an old wood cook stove, and she was always cooking on that. We always had to be up by 5 o'clock to eat breakfast, what we would call a big country breakfast now, and biscuits and so forth. And she would cook those. And the old wood cook stove, I was afraid she was going to get burned with it. And I heard her weeping one morning. It was about 4:30. And I got up and creeped in there because I didn't want to scare her. And I could hear her crying and sobbing. And when I walked around the corner, Grammy still didn't hear me. That's what we called her, Grammy. And so I could see tears coming off of her face and sizzling on that stove beneath her. And she was praying. The reason she was weeping is not she was hurt physically. She was praying for God to save her boys and to give her strength to go on. She was crippled. Remember, we had no outside toilet, so everything she did personally, she had to do standing up because she could never bend her knee. And so, I mean, it's just a mountain woman that loved God and believed that her mission in life was to get her boys raised and for them to come to know Jesus. And I tell you, Paul, I never got away. I never got away from that. And
Wow.
Still to this day, I'm tender about it. Because when I was out there thinking about, okay, I'm going to end my life, or I'm never going to amount to anything, because that's what people had told me. The store that I went to, I remember the ladies of the little community would be in there, and I'd go on the other side of the aisle after greeting them. And, you know, when you're poor, people think you're deaf. And so I would hear them say, there goes that little Chris boy. He's never going to amount to a hill of beans. He's never going to amount to anything. Somebody needs to take those kids away from Miss McGuire. And what they didn't realize was, if they had taken us away from her, they would have taken away our lifeline, because she was our lifeline, not only our lifeline to this life, but to the next. And so I never could get away from the prayers of my godly grandmother. And so I came to the point one day that I just said, God, whatever's left with the rest of my life, it's a wreck. I've made a wreck out of my life. Would you just take me and use me somehow? God, I give you everything I am. I turn from everything I've ever thought. Just help me to know how to know you in a personal way. And I'm telling you, I cannot tell you in syllable or in sentence what God did in my life that day. I'd heard, you know, I had long hair down on my back. I was smoking, cussing, drinking. And everybody would always say, the preacher would say, boy, you need to get that old haircut. You need to, you know, just country as could be, and telling me what all I need to do. Well, God did more in 5 minutes to clean me up than 18 years, 19 years of preaching. And it was because of the prayers of my godly grandmother. I went and told her what God had done. And she just, that was her life. And my two older brothers came to know Jesus, and it's just, they're serving the Lord. I'm serving the Lord, and my grandmother is in heaven, and I'm satisfied. This is the reason we're not rewarded as soon as we go to heaven, is because our life goes on, our work goes on. And so every time I speak, every time I do something that's worthy of honor, my grandmother is getting another crown. You know, it's just because she never got to travel, do what she wanted to do, had an 8th grade education, but through my two brothers and I, she's touched more lives than probably people who have traveled the world.
Sounds like an unbelievably faithful woman, and she may have been the toughest person that you've ever encountered.
Oh, she's no doubt the epitome. I'm talking about the book on top of the book. That is what true grit and trust in God and hard work produces. And thank God we have lived in a nation to where somebody of my background can have a life worth living and influence others. This is why if our nation goes down the tubes, it's going to go down with my fingerprints on the side of the tubes, because I've been blessed. I've been blessed beyond words could ever say.
Can the 18-year-old or 11-year-old version ever imagine you speaking in front of 17,000 people?
Oh, no.
It's unbelievable.
No, there was no. After the Lord really changed my life, I had one goal, and that was my grandmother had deeded us 5 acres each, and mine was just basically a gully on our farm. But it was clear. We had cleared it off and from timber. And I remember as plain as if it was yesterday, I would dream about getting a what we called a trailer then, a mobile home. You know, not a double wide, that wasn't even invented then, but just something that I could have running water, dig a well, and maybe find somebody that would love me and could get married and have kids and just live in a trailer. I thought that was because I went into one, a nice one that one of my friends had, and I thought, okay, I've died and gone to heaven. They've got everything here. It's all set up. They roll it in on wheels and, put that was my ambition in life.
Well, the the structure you grew up in, can you describe it for me? Like, was it one or two bedrooms kind of thing?
No, it was a old home that was built. The foundation was rocks, just rocks, no cement or anything like that, just rocks, big rocks. It was 4 rooms, had a kitchen, and had a dining room, and the fireplace was on either side of it. The room is right in the middle of the room, so either one side was kitchen, one side, and then you had a living room, had another fireplace in it, and then 1 bedroom. My grandmother slept in the living room where we heated that room in the wintertime, and all of the rest of us slept in a room that had a fireplace, but the chimney was all cracked and everything, and so we couldn't have a fire in it. And so I have slept under as many as 13 covers, quilts. You're as tired when you get up in the morning as you did because you had to stay warm. I've watched my brothers and we would get tickled at one another because we would get up and the floor would be so cold that our feet would stick to it because they'd be moist from under that cover. And that's the kind of life that we grew up, and we'd run and get into the one room that was heated. And so that's where we lived and had 2 big porches, and that's where my grandmother washed and did the laundry and everything's on the back porches. And we had a cellar that raised up under the hallway between the bedroom and the living room. And that's where my grandmother's old Singer treadle sewing machine was, where she sewed and did everything that she could. And in that cellar, we kept all of our canned goods because we raised everything that we ate, except what I traded for at the grocery store. By the way, I married the grocer's daughter. We've been married 45, going on 46 years. So the moral of that story is you make enough trips to the grocery store, you get a wife. And but that's straight. And it was the floor was wood. It was just tongue and groove wood. Walls, floor, ceiling, everything was the same. And so it was all wood house. And the windows we couldn't open or shut. So in the wintertime we were cold, and in the summertime we were scalding hot because we couldn't raise the windows. And we couldn't afford to buy new windows. We barely could just live. And so that would have been a luxury. So we put hard plastic over it. I mean, a kind of hard, thick plastic over them to keep the wind out. But that was about it. And just you think of Appalachian kids, and I was an Appalachian kid.
Yeah. And people don't talk about stories like yours at all. Like your story is so foreign to most people, how you grew up, that it's almost hard for them to fathom and or appreciate what you went through. This is kind of a strange question, Tony, but was there 1 bed in the bedroom for you and your brothers?
There were 2. There actually was 1 bed, but someone knew our plight. I don't even remember who it was, and gave my a small, what we would call a twin bed today. It was actually smaller than that. But I can't remember how we chose. We might have drawn straws or something. But anyway, my brother John got it. And so Jim and I had to sleep together. My 2 brothers, by the way, are James and John. With Jimmy and Johnny growing up. And so Johnny got the bed, and Jim and I still had to sleep together, which I hated. But, is what it was. But it was an incredible experience growing up. And by the way, my 2 brothers and I are still very, very close today. My wife says she'd never seen 3 brothers this close. We never did fight. We would argue from time to time and have little squabbles, but we never hit one another. We never raised our hands toward one another. We were just trying to survive. And a lot of our fights were over. Somebody would catch one of us, say something and beat us up. We'd go find them, all 3 of us, and just beat the tar out of them, And so people got to leaving us alone because they didn't feel like it was worth it.
Well, yeah, because they were going to get beaten up.
Yeah, no, we were going to get them sooner or later.
I asked you the bed question because I grew up in a 2-bedroom home. Nothing like the way you grew up. It was a small brick rancher, and it's just my sister and me staying in the same room. And a lot of people I tell that to, they're like, I can't believe you were in the same room with your sister. And I'm like, well, that's just how it was for us. And my first cousin, who was 10 years older than me, I was 8 at the time, he was 18. He and I slept in the same twin bed. And people were like, you slept in the same bed as your cousin? I'm like, that's just how we had to do it.
Oh, no. And when they would have a friend over, I rarely had any over. I was so embarrassed by the way that we lived. And because we just didn't. And so from time to time they would have a friend over, and we would let the friend have the single bed, and all three of us boys would sleep together. Now, that's one thing when you're 7, 11, and 12. It's another thing when you're 12, 16, 17. And this was not a queen bed. This was a full-size bed. And
which is not big.
No, it's not big at all. And a lot of people don't even have those anymore, and so I'm talking about couples and stuff. But all to say, it's just, it was the way we grew up. But I was so ashamed of it. I can't even, I'm ashamed that I was ashamed. But, I was embarrassed because, again, this was 60s and 70s. And so, for instance, I always wanted to be in the Boy Scouts, and I never could be in the Boy Scouts, and we had no cash money. We worked like dogs, and we'd do it, but we bought our own school clothes. Part of the fights that I was in is I had one pair of pants, I had 2 shirts. And so I wanted to, like, for instance, if we were out playing ball, I would never slide in because I was afraid I'd rip my pants or something, and then the Grammy'd have to patch them. And then that'd be other fights from people making fun of that. And it was not back in the days when wearing ripped jeans and stuff was cool. It was, you wore nice stuff. And so my grandmother would have to wash on our stuff, wintertime, summertime, whatever. And so I didn't want to cause her that kind of work. And I didn't want to have to go carry more water. If it didn't rain, we couldn't catch it off the roof. And so, I had to get in coal and kindling to start the fire again and keep the stove going. So it was a hassle. So some people would say to me, as hardly a week went by, somebody didn't say, didn't you just wear that? I mean, do you wear the same clothes all the time, Chris? And so then I just bust their mouth. I mean, it was just a constant make fun, shame, embarrassment. And but many people, those were a certain kind of people. But I tell you, people were I had a lot of very good friends, people that they knew what we were going through, and they loved us and cared for us. And we had good neighbors. The closest neighbor was a mile away, and they were old people. And they were old then. They weren't to us, but they really weren't that old. But we worked for them and helped them, and they would pay us something, maybe a quarter, 50 cents an hour. And boy, that was like, it was wonderful for us. It was like manna from heaven. And so it's just a different kind of life growing up.
Well, Tony, you obviously it sounds like a great relationship and tons of admiration for your grandmother. You mentioned a principal, so you were going to school. So you had adults that in theory could have a good or bad influence on you through school. And because you and I had chatted a few weeks ago, I also know that you're a basketball guy.
Yeah.
Did you have adults in your life in the school system, whether it's a teacher, administrator, or a coach, that had a positive influence on you?
Well, yeah. So you see, again, when you're poor, people will not only think you're deaf and can't hear and make fun of you, but they'll give you anything. They'll give you what they don't want, and so someone gave us, the way I got into basketball, someone gave us a basketball with a tumor on it, Paul. By that, I mean, the basketballs used to have tubes inside of them. And when you wore them down, the tube would kind of split, with the basketball cover would split, and there'd be a little tumor come out. And so they gave us a basketball with a tumor on it. And so I learned to dribble a basketball with both hands on dirt, keeping the tumor up all the time. So, because if a tumor hit, I was afraid it would burst, but not only that, it would go off down the hill or something, so it just shoot out like a rocket. So I learned with both hands to do that. And so when I got a round ball on a wooden court, I mean, I was like early Magic Johnson,
Pete Maravich of East Tennessee.
Yeah, I could dribble, do anything like that. Nobody could steal the ball from me. And so then I learned to shoot what was then 2 points. It's 3 points now, but that was back in the day. And I learned to shoot basketball. We had a barn, and I found a beauty ring on the side of the road. Beauty ring was a rim that went around the tire and the rim on the car to kind of make it beauty and stand out. And they'd paint the inside black. And so I'm talking about a lot of redneck stuff here. But anyway, I learned, just to put a ball through that hoop from a long way off. And so I'd come across a half line to shoot what was now 3 points, but then and so, I was the point guard for the school. And so they didn't want to fail me. So that's one reason I got through school. Same thing, in high school. So, but I loved it. It was my life. It gave me something to do. And by the way, they would put the principal and the coach under the jail now, because I hitchhiked home every day after practice, unless I get a ride from somebody. And it was 7-8 miles home. But nobody worried about that evil then, I wasn't afraid of anybody picking me up. No one was. And so people would usually pick me up and take me, and I'd always have to walk a couple of miles, but that was no big deal then either. And but my coach, his name was David Pierce, and before him, Kenneth Guffey, really took me in, Paul. And I remember the coach, who, by the way, became the superintendent of schools there, and we still have a wonderful relationship today. And his name was David Pierce, and he became a very close friend of mine. He kind of watched out for me. He bought me. I remember we had to have I was the only boy in the 6th grade that made the team. So I was able to, go travel to other schools and stuff, and on the bus. That was a big deal. And in the 7th grade, we were having an exceptionally hard time that year because crops didn't do what they needed to do. Tobacco crop was not that good. And so I had no money for tennis shoes, and it was $7 for the tennis shoes. I remember it was Chuck's Smith All-Stars, Converse All-Stars. And we were all wearing the kind that had high tops, and so it was a big deal. And so I knew I was so dreading going in and telling the coach I didn't have money for Converse, and I knew that I couldn't be on the team, with them and stuff. And when I went in on the bench where I always got laid, there was a box of my size Converse there. And I went to the coach and I said, "Coach, everybody's got shoes and this box left over." He said, "Now you've got shoes." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, let's just keep this between us." But he said, "I knew that you needed these, Tony, and I want you on the team." And he said, "You got people that love you." And he said, "We believe in you."
Yeah. And $7 is probably a good chunk of change for him too.
Oh, it was a lot of money for him. He was on a teacher's salary. He was just getting started himself. He was young, but there were some good, godly people that took me under their wing and watched over me the best that they could, as much as I would let them have territory in my life. And boy, I'm still tender toward children today that are the rejects, because Paul, I was a reject of our culture. I was a discard of our society there. And the wonderful thing about God is he is in the business of taking rejects and discards. And my life verse is in the book of 1 Corinthians, where it says, "Not many mighty, not many noble, not many of good birth." And by the way, the Greek word there is eugenics, not good DNA. God is in the business of taking rejects and nobodies and doing something and making them somebodies. And I'm so grateful for that. So I am kind of the man that's always looking for that person that nobody else wants, and God's let me walk with giants, but my heart is still for that little guy out there. And that's why, to everybody, I'm not Dr. Smell Fungus. I have degrees and all those kind of things, but people know me as Brother Tony.
Yeah. Tony, I am so happy you and I have met. Your story is powerful and unbelievable and inspiring. And we're not even past the age of 19 yet, talking about your life story. So your grandmother, you had this moment with your grandmother where it really turned your life around.
Yes, it did.
And so you're 19. What are you doing at the age of 19 when you're starting to make this major turn?
Yeah, well, I was actually working for my wife's dad in the store. And we used to burst beer bottles up against the back of his store, and that kind of thing. So the old, you keep your enemies closer. And so he hired me, I think more than anything, he kind of helped me out, but also to keep an eye on me. And, but they were a wonderful family. They knew my background. As a matter of fact, her mother many times would come and get me and take me to Vacation Bible School and to church. And Karen would be in the car, my wife, and, she was 4 years younger than me. So, when you're 11 and someone else is 7, that's a big age difference. And so she was always like a little friend, little sister, and so forth. When I was 18, she was 14, and she kind of grew up overnight. And I thought, okay, this is worth investigation. And God put our lives together. But I was working at the store, and then I got a job detailing cars, and just from not any big jobs or anything like that. But honestly, when the Lord saved me and changed my life, Paul, the first thing I did is I started reading the Bible. And because I had a Bible, I'd won it in the 3rd grade for selling plastic pictures of Jesus. And I sold enough, out in the community that I won a little school Bible. And so I started reading it. And my grandmother got concerned about me because, I was 19 years old. I didn't want to have anything to do with women anymore. I didn't want to have anything to do with drinking, smoking, anything. And so she really got concerned about me. I mean, I'd really gotten too saved. And so
I didn't know that was such a thing, though.
So anyway, but after 3 months, I really knew God was calling me to preach. And so I said, Lord, give me a desire to study your word and teach me how to study. And so I started praying about school. I knew I needed help. I couldn't even, you think my grammar and diction's atrocious now. You should have heard me then. I mean, it was in there, up there, over. And so, people couldn't even understand me. So I knew if I was going to preach, I had to learn how to speak and read well and so forth. And so I started looking for schools. And there were only 2 choices. One was a very liberal school north of Knoxville. That was a Baptist school. And the other was in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which was like a boot camp. Is all they were interested in is how short your hair was and whether you read a certain version of the Bible and so forth. And so I knew that was not well. So I went to a man took me, he said, I want to take you to an evangelism conference in Nashville, Tennessee. And I'd only been to Nashville once on an 8th grade trip. And so I thought that was the biggest thing in the world, capital of the state. And so I went over there to that evangelism conference, and I heard a man named W.A. Criswell. He was pastor of the First Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, the largest Southern Baptist church in the world. And I'd never heard anybody preach like that. I'd heard a lot of preachers called East Tennessee windsuckers that were running up and down the aisle, and breathing, as they preached. And it's its own arena. And so I said, Lord, help me to go to school. He had started a little school, an institute. And I didn't care anything about it. Accreditation. I didn't know what any of that was or anything. And so I wrote them a handwritten letter, no ACT, SAT or anything, and said, will you take me in? They said, yes, if you'll come. And so I'd never been any farther west than Nashville, didn't even know. I had $240 in my pocket that I'd saved up from hauling hay and so forth, bought a car. That's what I had left over. And so I headed out, left my grandmother and went to Dallas, Texas, and lived on $1.26 a day for the first 5 months. I lost 15 pounds the first month I was there. I went from 165 down to 150 in just like no time. And I ate one meal a day at the downtown YMCA. It was $1.99 for a vegetable plate, and you eat all you wanted to. So I stuffed myself every day and went to school. And the first class I had to take was Hebrew. That was all that was left when I went there. I didn't know English. And so after 2 weeks, the Hebrew professor, who's internationally known, came to me and he said, Mr. Crisp, I can't teach you Hebrew. And I said, well, why, Dr. Edelman? He said, you don't know English. And so he said, I teach you Hebrew by its relation to English. And so he said, here is a handbook. It was a little brown handbook. And he said, you're going to have to teach yourself English. I don't have time to, but if you can learn English, I'll teach you Hebrew. And so I went home and studied. I worked at Sears, a sporting goods salesman, as a part-time, because I didn't have to get on any interstates. I'd never driven much, and farthest west I'd ever been was Nashville. And so I didn't know my way around, scared to death, and so backward. And so I didn't make much money. And so I'd work till about 7 o'clock at night, and I studied English from 7 at night until didn't have supper. So I'd go home and to the apartment, the room I was staying in. And Paul, I studied English 3 hours a night, taught myself English so I could learn Hebrew. And he taught me Hebrew so well that after the second semester, I became the Hebrew tutor for the school. It just, God has helped me with it. And so that started my pursuit. And then he said, I want you to study with me in Israel. So the next year he took me to Israel, and we studied there together. And he had been a missionary there. He was fluent in Hebrew and Arabic. And he was a PhD Koine Greek scholar. So he got me involved in languages. And after the first semester, I went on staff at First Baptist Church in Dallas, the largest Southern Baptist church in the world. When I was there, they crossed over the 20,000 member mark, which in that time was in the mid 70s was a huge, huge church. And W.A. Crystal was the best known Southern Baptist in the world. And so I became his personal intern for 2 years. And what an experience. So after that, the rest is history. It's just, I just kept going to school. I've been a professional student, so to speak. And I'm still learning today. I'm learning, I'm teaching, I'm learning, I'm teaching. That's what I do. And just spent a lot of time in the classroom. But more than anything, I've studied under great men of God. I studied under some of the greatest Christian men of the last century. And I'm very well aware of to whom much is given, much will be required.
So you're 19 or 20 years old, and you find yourself not being fluent in any language effectively? That's
correct. That's correct.
Trying to go through an education.
That's right. And honestly, knowing what a noun and a verb was, but that was about it. And I'm not sure I could have picked one out in a sentence. And because I didn't have to, I had played basketball. I had been, then they could pass you on what was called social promotions. That's what they called it there. In other words, there was one teacher in one subject or one class. And if they didn't want to mess with you, they could just pass you on or fail you. And they didn't want to have you again. So they just passed you on. So I went through school, never read a serious book till I was 19, till after the Lord saved me.
Wow. Certainly an indictment on the public school system back then and maybe even now, because I have a sense, and I have direct experience where kids are passed on. I see it all the time. And I wish it wasn't like that.
Coach, the coach that I was telling you about, when I was in the 6th grade, we'd moved into a new school, a brand new school, and he gave us a test. He was not only the PE teacher, but he was health. And so every Friday we had health. And he gave an exam. And so it was a multiple choice, and it's A, B, C, or D, and so I looked at that test, and I knew the first 2 or 3 answers, And as soon as I started taking that test, I think there were 25 questions on it. I realized his pattern. He had set those questions up to where it'd be easy for him to grade. I know that now. I didn't know then, but I realized he had put the alphabet from the middle at the top and went to the middle. Then he started again through the rest of the alphabet, center to the end. And so I just filled it in very, very quickly. I didn't even read the thing. I took it up there after about 5 minutes. It was an hour class, and after about 5 minutes, I take it back up there, and I said, "Hey," and of course I knew him. He was my coach. I said, "You can give me an A now if you want to." And he said, "Chris," he said, "if you don't have an A, if you get one question wrong," he said, "I'm going to wear you out." And see, they paddle you then, and he did from time to time. And so I said, "Go ahead." So I went back to my desk, and at the end of class, he said, "Chris," they call me, Tony every now and then, but it was mostly Chris or Crispy. And so he said, "You stay behind." And he came up and he said, "How did you figure that out?" And I said, "Well, it was very simple. I could see the pattern." He said, "Tony, listen to me." He said, "You've been gifted by God." And he said, God has a great future for you. I don't know what you're going to do in life, but he said, don't you ever believe that you're dumb. You're not. He said, you're very smart. And he said, I believe in you.
It's powerful. You were not interested in being educated
at
that age.
No. As a matter of fact, I just thought, shoot your best shot. I'll try it again. That was just cocky attitude, it's just horrible.
Well, it sounds like the path you took ended up correcting a lot of that immaturity, we'll call it. Yeah. So I'm going to jump.
Is what they called it. Yeah.
They call it what?
Meanness is what they called it.
So maybe that's a little more to the point.
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna jump forward a lot as a way of getting into the conversation about Israel. Where were you on October 7th about the atrocities that day?
Well, we were getting ready to leave. I own a touring company and have for 38 years. And so we had a big year lined up of groups that were coming up. And we were, that happened on Shabbat on a Saturday. And on Monday or Tuesday, we were set to leave with a group that I would be leading and teaching there. I take pastors and their churches over, and many times just pastors groups, and teach them there and invest my life into them. And so when that happened, I knew it was almost like 9/11. I knew nothing would be the same again. And in my lifetime, it won't be. This is a major turning point. Because of our present U.S.-Israel relationships and how that happened, it will change the world and how they look at Israel. It will change the world and how we view the Middle East. It was a cosmic shift, and I had the same sense that I did in 9/11. I knew where I was. I knew what I was doing. I knew the preparation. And when I heard about it, I really could not believe that there had been that much damage done, and we didn't know immediately how much it was, and how that the Israelis could be so surprised by it, because I work with a lot of people, as you might imagine, in the Middle East, some in intelligence and so forth, and I knew how they were, but I also knew that Israel was divided. It was sidetracked. It was there was a deviation from the way that Israel was looked at itself, and so and there was a diversion going on, and the time was right. I felt, and immediately it all just came to me. We had a weak administration, viewed from the world leadership as weak, especially the Middle East. Wherever you are on the political scale, this is just reality. We can't change facts. It's just what it is. And so I knew that there was a chance of some kind of war breaking out, because the Middle Eastern nations only respond to strength. And so we were set up for that thing, and Israel was set up for it because they were diverted. They diverted their attention to infighting. They become hubris and proud. I believe, this is my assessment, that they couldn't be breached, and nobody would attempt to go against the mighty IDF. And so I think it's very much akin to the 1973 Yom Kippur War, when Israel felt like they could not be attacked, and they saw the tank build up and all those kind of things, but they just couldn't believe it. I think the same thing, very close to that, happened. I may be wrong. That's on my personal opinion.
Yeah, I couldn't believe the level and the number of people, and by level I mean the hatred
Right.
and the anti-Semitic behavior, how
Right.
deep it was and how broad it was, but by the number of people that were expressing it. I couldn't believe it was 2023 or now 2024
No,
that's
no,
still
it's
being
right.
expressed. It must be
No,
what it
it-
felt
it-
like back in the 30s.
Yes, it was Hitler-esque, and in some ways the same kind of atrocities, because it's the same demonic behavior. This is supernatural behavior. It's supernatural wickedness. I mean, what was done to the Israelis that day, we can never let the world forget this. And the reason is because it will repeat itself again. And I fear that this is exactly what's going to happen here somewhere in the United States, simply because the same villains that did that same seed is here in the United States. And God only knows how many cells are around the nation right now. So we've got to be very vigilant about what's going on, because these people mean business. They want to destroy Israel. They want to destroy the Judeo-Christian value system and the West.
And why? And look, a couple of facts here. One is there are 15 million Jews worldwide. Roughly 7 million of those are in Israel, another 6 million in the U.S. So it's really our two countries have a supermajority of Jewish people.
Right.
And the other fact, and maybe my number's off a little bit, but there have been 19 very serious, over a long period of time, attempts to eradicate Jewish people from the earth.
Yes,
the Nazis
yes.
did it the 19th time. My fear is we're on the precipice of the 20th attempt.
Yes, well, I would agree with you. And that's just all that it is taking world conditions, taking the conditions in the West and the Middle East, and just being a realist. And this is very serious, and we must take it seriously. And this is not just a run-of-the-mill kind of things. This is the most vicious attack since the Holocaust. And the same mentality of the Holocaust is present among us today in far greater numbers, which has been evidenced than I think anyone believed.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that people can be easily swept into this. Like I've seen people on social media that I know, I wouldn't call them my friends, but they're acquaintances, and I see them with a Palestinian flag protesting the existence of Israel. And I'm like,
yes, you're exactly right, Paul. And I just saw a Prager video today. And of course, there's been many of these done, but it was very well done. That one of the people went out with a microphone and was asking these protesters, from the river to the sea, what river is it? What sea is it? They didn't even know that. I mean, they didn't know that. And they were just saying, well, there's genocide. And so they that the Israelis are perpetrating genocide upon the Arabs, and on and on and on. And it was the most ignorant people that you could ever imagine. Now, many of them college graduates and so forth. And again, that tells us something of our educational system in America and where we are, because it was idiocy, and it was on public display. People that ought to know better, that do not know better. But we are living in a society with a mob mentality, and facts mean nothing. History means nothing. It's just if you don't like it, rewrite it. And so it's horrible.
I never thought I'd live to see the day, and I'm only 55, Tony. I'm flummoxed. I'm perplexed by what I see and hear and read. Do you have ideas about how we can take the ignorant amongst us and make them more knowledgeable about how things really do work?
Well, I don't think it is a one size fits all approach, but what we have to do, I get almost put on a cross for saying this, but our public education, I'm not talking about the teachers. There's some good teachers, great people that are in public education. So I always want to preface what I'm saying to that. But I'm telling you, we are educating in a very foolish naivete that is rewriting our own history. I teach the history of Israel, and I'm finding out that most people, I can't even relate it to modern or ancient history and the last 100 years of history, because people in America that I'm dealing with, old and young, don't know our own history. And so we have gone to the kind of things, silly things that we're doing today, like critical race theory and all this kind of garbage, instead of teaching the great classics and teaching people how to read and write and do arithmetic and just the very basics of teaching of history and how we got to where we are today. And that's the enemy's philosophy, because you see, if you don't know history and you don't know where you came from, you cannot know where you're going. But not only that, you're destined to repeat the failures of the past. And that's just on a totally secular mindset. There's a whole spiritual aspect of this that intertwines within this that's too long for me to get into now. But it's all together. We're stripping away our moral base. And Paul Harvey, one of the things I was blessed to be able to do is every great speaker you can imagine came through First Baptist Dallas, Texas. And I got to meet them up close. And because I was the pastor's personal intern, would take them to the airport or, come get them. So I spoke with him. Paul Harvey said when he came and spoke in Dallas, he said he was the first that really impressed me with this, and I've studied it intentionally and intensely since. But he said democracy, any form of democracy, but the republic upon which our nation was founded, the Judeo-Christian value system, he says democracy doesn't work without a moral base, a Judeo-Christian moral base. And man, had he ever hit a home run by saying that, because democracy doesn't work unless there is inward restraint, moral restraint within a person. And you can pass all the laws you want to. You can't change hearts with laws. And our system does not work without a Judeo-Christian value system under it. It just becomes, in other words, free enterprise just becomes greed and avarice and the strongest survives mentality. And we have now taught, now 3 or 4 generations that we are not made in the image of God. We're here by random chance, and the strongest survives. And so when we teach our children that they come from just a random chance and selection, and from apes and monkeys, we shouldn't be surprised when they act like apes on the streets of the cities when there's no restraint. No,
that's really well said, and a wonderful reminder of what we need to get back to as a society. Mm-hmm. I imagine you have a rhythm to your life, and tell me if this is accurate or not. Is the rhythm partially based on the calendar, and so there's certain times of year that you are a certain place and doing certain things? And I'm really asking, how do you spend your time in the U.S. and are you typically in East Tennessee? And then when you do travel, is it primarily Israel? And what are you doing when you do travel?
Just since COVID, before COVID, I had not been a pastor. I've been a pastor for 46 years. And I've always pastored. I've pastored rural churches out in the countryside, and I've pastored a couple of mega churches, what would be called mega churches, and in the city and rural and the suburbs and so forth. And because I've been doing this now for 48, 49 years. And so I, up until the COVID, we were spending about 4 to 5 months a year in Israel because I was there teaching, researching, studying, writing, all those things. And during COVID, I could not go. And a church from the Tri-Cities area of Kingsport called me and said, we've had some difficulty. We would love for you to come in. We hear that you go in and troubleshoot churches, assess churches, and then lead them to another plateau or help them get started on the right track. I do those kind of things and have for years. And even when I was pastoring large churches, I would do that because my heart is to train the next generation of pastors and leaders. And so I came and I told them I'd help them for 3 months. After 3 months, I saw, they're going to need some more help, and I'm not going to be going to Israel, so I'm not going to be out of the country. So I made a commitment for a year. I'm starting in my 4th year now with them, and they allow me 16 weeks or more if I need in Israel a year. They continue to pay me just like I was right here, so that I don't have to worry about a living. I help other churches all over America. I invest in people. I was named in August the executive director of the Center for Israel Studies at Bruton Parker College, fully regionally accredited college in South Georgia. So I'm helping them put together curriculum. I've done that for other schools, and to help them to understand the importance of Israel and the Jews in the biblical narrative. Because without the Jews, there's not going to be the Bible that we have today. Just on and on. So what I do is I spend my life teaching what I call the linguistic, historical, geographical, and cultural contextual teaching of the Bible. And so I teach the true Jewish roots of Christianity, and the place of Israel and the church side by side in the Bible. And so now what I'm doing is I have and this is, personal stuff, but I have a podcast now that's heard in 80 nations. I have taken 365 chapters of the Bible that I selected, what I call key chapters, and I write something on that every day. And on those chapters, but I do a 15 to 20 minute podcast. I call it the 365 Bible Reading Plan. So now that's all over the world. And I've done now 1,000 as of today, 1,039 podcasts of 15, 20 minutes each day. And so I'm writing, I'm putting together now about to start on developing a study Bible that will be built around warriors and then and now for law officers, military, police, people in our federal agencies, CIA, FBI, anyone that is in a warrior's position. This study Bible will be for them, and I'll have the 365 plan because we've got to get people back to reading the Bible and studying the Bible. Now, what somebody says about the Bible, my podcast, I say the most important thing about my podcast is the scripture you read that goes with it, because that's what changes lives. And so I'm a pastor of a local assembly, a growing local church in Kingsport, Tennessee, but I travel all over America helping churches. We do a Passover Seder at the Convention Center in Kingsport, a big Marriott center that is simulcast nationwide, where people can actually see a Jewish Seder, and with the elements that Jesus was doing the night he was betrayed, and took what we call the Lord's Supper, and teach them about communion from a biblical standpoint, and basically just teach the Judaic aspects, which has been lost in the West. So that's what I do, and I do it year round. So my calendar is really full. When there's not war, I'm in Israel usually January, February, March, and then come home, then go back in May, maybe, and some in June. And then I'm traveling. The church allows me to travel. And many times people come here, but I'm involved in just educating and discipling people. And that's what I do as a way of life. I'm all in. I work. I told someone my PhD is in organizational leadership, and so I help a lot of pastors to organize their churches and so forth, and for success and biblical basis. And I'm doing more now than I've ever done. God's let me have good health. And someone asked me in a conference they said, "How do you do all that you're doing in your 60s?" I said, "Well, I only work a half a day, 6 days a week." And they said, "You work 4 hours a day?" I said, "You must work for a union." I said, half a day is 12 hours. I said, "I average 12 hours a day." And so I said, "I work 6 days a week. But when I take off, I take off. I really take off, and I'm just out. And my idea of a vacation now is going and sitting somewhere and staring, either an ocean or a mountain or something. I'm over Six Flags and Dollywood and Disney World. If you said to me, "We're going to give you an all expense paid trip to Disney World, and or you can ram your head through a wall," I would say, "Which wall would you like for me to ram it through?"
Before we go, because I think we talked about doing roughly an hour, and we're a little over an hour now, and I'm enjoying the conversation, but I do have commitments, like I imagine you do.
Oh, so do I.
The Warrior Walk. Tell me about the Warrior Walk.
Yeah, well, I tell you the best way that I could tell, if anybody has access to the internet, they need to go to warriors-walk.com. Warriors with an S -walk.com. And what it is, a guy who owns a dear friend of mine, we partnered to form this. He owns a very well-known worldwide intelligence agency. He works with the federal government and our federal agencies, to staff them, and he's got a very, very large human network. And he loves Jesus with all of his heart, and so his leadership does as well. As a matter of fact, you can go to 5stonesintelligence.com. The 5 stones will give you an idea, but it is on the cover page that he says that they are followers of Jesus, the leadership are, and Judeo-Christian in their value system, so forth. So he's unashamed of this. And so we started this to take warriors. I'm talking about people that have been involved in CIA, FBI, all of our DEA, federal agencies, state agencies, military, Navy SEALs, Rangers, people, sheriffs, just anyone that is a special agent, law enforcement, military. We take them to Israel. Many of these, we pay their way. We raise money and pay their way. Others pay a portion. We pay a portion. Some can pay their own way. But we take them to Israel. They train the same place the IDF trains, with the IDF, with whomever we're working with. They're trained at every night while we're in Israel. We're there for 9 days. We have specialists come in from Mossad, Shin Bet, Shabak, all of these places, everything from cyber warfare. They get briefings and education to Krav Maga, where you're really going through it in the field. And with the, weapons training, all those kind of things. And then I take them out about 6-7 hours a day and teach them the Bible on site. They can ask any questions they want to. Nothing's off limits, but I take them from the Galilee and from the north, Syrian-Lebanese border, the Valley of Tears, all the way to Masada. And we go, I just teach them. I pour my life into them. And we form relationships through that. And when they get back, as a matter of fact, this year, we're probably going to have a couple of conferences here in America for Warriors Walk, where people can come and be taught. And we can't go to Israel right now, but we can bring Israel to us. And so that's what we're going to do, and bring in the top people to help them. But our goal is to be a resource for these people in law enforcement, these warriors, these people that are out there on the front lines every day, active, still active, and that need to form a network. Because just think about it, Paul. If you're in law enforcement, or you're in the military, you're in special forces, somehow you're a special agent, you basically are owned by whatever it is that you're doing. You're there many times 7 days a week, or you're working on the weekends when everybody else is going to church. And many of them do not have any kind of network whatsoever. So we're a network for them. Mm-hmm. I counsel with people, talk with people all over the world, but especially here in the United States, every week of my life, and walk them through a lot of stuff. And I'm training others to do that, so that we can form a network to be an underpinning, a net, a safety net for them, for all of these in these agencies where they can't talk to anybody. They need to do it in a secure way. And so we make sure they can do that.
That's wonderful, Tony. I'm so glad you and your friend are doing that. It has to be unimaginably powerful for everybody that goes through that experience. That's great.
No, it's life-changing. As a matter of fact, I could tell you story after story, but I have to leave out too many names and places for it to make sense because of security reasons. But I deal with people that are on the front lines every day of their life, that are in some of the greatest missions that you hear about on TV and this, that, and the other. But they have to go back home, and PTSD is a real thing. And so many of these people have been our strategic leaders in other nations, but they come home and they've got to switch gears, and that's a very difficult thing to do. And you can only categorize so much in your mind. And so what we have found out is that Jesus is not only the answer in this certain arena of church and religious things. Jesus is the answer to life. And we teach, what I teach is that Jesus doesn't want to be a part of your life. He wants to be your life. And so that's really where we're talking about people that are already familiar with sell out. And so we teach them to sell out to God himself, to the Lord Jesus, and life takes on whole new meaning then. And that helps them to, they find out that the Lord's with them no matter what they're doing. And so it's a great comfort to them and encouragement to them, Paul.
No, that's great. And guys coming home certainly need that help. I've deployed, and it was not an easy transition for sure.
No,
I wish I knew you back then, Tony. Last couple topics. One's a pretty quick hitter, and then the last one you can answer as short or as long as you want.
Yeah.
You're going to be in the Richmond area soon, right?
I'm going to be there next week. Mark and I do something Mark started years ago. I just got in on it, but we've developed it into a great system. It's called First Friday Shabbat. And what we do at these First Friday Shabbats, we have a Shabbat meal and at a church or gymnasium, wherever we are, and people come in by the hundreds. I mean, literally by the hundreds. And we teach them about Shabbat from a biblical standpoint. What is it for the Jew? What is it for the non-Jew? I teach the 7 Moedim, the special appointed days that we call feasts, festivals, and fast days. Passover, Shavuot, Pentecost, and all that. I teach them to try to teach our Judaic roots during that time and help them to understand the Jewish people. One reason why there's so much anti-Semitism is because the Church of Jesus doesn't realize, because we've separated so from our Jewish roots, we don't realize who we are and who they are. And most people in the South that I've talked to, even today, that are outside of the major cities in the South have never met a Jew personally.
That's crazy.
And no, it is crazy, but it's the way it is. It's our world. And so what we try to do is do this First Friday Shabbat. So I will be at Berea Baptist Church in Rockville, right outside of Richmond, on Friday. And then I'll be preaching there Sunday because Mark and his pastor are on a solidarity mission over in Israel this next week. They leave Sunday afternoon. And so I am up there and going to be helping their church and working with their church to accomplish what that pastor wants to accomplish. And that's really what I do, is I come in as alongside the pastor and can help them to transition more to a biblically based church and not just out there in a traditional sense doing what we've done, because whatever we've done, it's not working. The Church of Jesus is becoming weaker and weaker and smaller in relation to the population.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. So I bring that up, one, for people to know that, and two, I'm going to physically meet you. I'll meet you in person.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Boy, I look forward to that, Paul.
That's going to be good. Last question or last topic. Tell me about your family, your immediate family these days.
Well, I married my childhood sweetheart, and we started seeing one another when I was 18, 14. Don't anybody stone me. You know, it's a different day, different time. There's nothing hanky-panky going on. I never touched her. She was pristine, pure, when we got married. I was 22. She graduated from high school. I married her the next week and brought her to Texas where I was in school. She started in school with me, got pregnant. And so she couldn't finish her education there. She's followed me all over the earth. June, we'll be married 46 years. We have 3 grown children, and the youngest 35, the oldest is 44. And my daughter in the middle, 2 sons on either end, and my daughter in the middle married a pastor. He pastors First Baptist Farmington, Arkansas. And they've got 2 girls, Autumn and Lily. And then my oldest son has 3 children, the oldest 14, Joel, and then 11, 12 now is Judah, and then Lila Mae, their daughter, and my youngest son is in Knoxville, and he is about to get married as well. So, you know, they're within. Charity is about 10 hours away, but the other 2 are about an hour and 20 minutes away from us. So that's good.
Yeah, that's great. Tony, you have lived in
Karen has been the epitome. If people ask me, and number one, she's drop dead gorgeous. And so we're more in love now than we've ever been in our lives. And we've worked at it hard. We've had our ups and downs and like everybody else, but she's got stick-to-itiveness, and God has granted us endurance, and we've raised these children. And let me tell you, she is the epitome of Southern elegance. She's poised, she's calm, she's the opposite of me. And, we stay married because of incompatibility. And we complement each other. And so she's a faithful wife, wonderful, godly woman, much godlier than I am. She's in the Word every day, and I just praise the Lord for that. And what a wonderful mother she's been.
Really well said, man. I'm going to have to listen to this a few more times so I can say powerful things about my wife, because that was beautiful. Tony, I really appreciate you doing this. You've lived an incredible life. You're still working half days, which I love. That it's 12 hours, not 4. And so you're still doing incredible things, and I really appreciate everything you've done for your fellow man.
Well, thank you so much. I look forward to meeting you next week, God willing.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.